Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 122 of the Trading Without Borders podcast. In today's episode, we will be exploring the opportunities and challenges that women encounter in cross-border trade across Africa. We will discuss whether the AFCFTA Women and Youth in Trade Protocol effectively addresses the unique barriers faced by women in informal trade and also share key recommendations for policymakers on implementing the protocol to empower women within this space. Today, I will be joined by our distinguished guest, Mary Frances Malunga, who is a gender and trade expert based in Blantyre, Malawi. She's the chairperson of the Alliance of Female Cross-Border Traders Association in Southern Africa, AFECTASA. She is a mentor at Trade Law Center Tralac. She governs trade program, which builds capacity on AFCFTA for women in trade institutions in Africa. Thank you so much, Mary, for joining us today. So, one of the traditions on this podcast is for our guests to greet the audience in their local language. So you're going to say hello to us in your local language today and let us know what it means. So please go ahead, Mary. You're welcome to Trading Without Borders podcast.
Thank you so much. In my local language, I would say "Muli bwanji," meaning "How are you?" or "Mwaswera bwanji," which means "Good afternoon."
All right. Thank you very much, Mary. That's interesting. So without further ado, I will now move on to the questions. So let's go into our discussion. So Mary, can you describe the primary functions of APEXASA and how its initiatives have encouraged the participation and success of women in cross-border trade across Africa?
Thank you very much. The Alliance of Female Cross-Border Traders Cross-Border Trader Associations in Southern Africa. We exist to facilitate trade for women in cross-border trade in Southern Africa. Our mission is a world where the rights of female cross-border traders are respected and their voices heard. We do conduct information dissemination in trade-related areas, such as regional and continental trade agreements. We also link our members to various trainings, including training in export readiness. We also look at issues of advocacy. So we advocate on behalf of women in cross-border trade throughout Southern Africa. And our organization, AFECTASA, was formed looking at the unique issues that affect women who are doing cross-border trade in Southern Africa. You find that there are a lot of organizations that are doing information dissemination, they are doing trade facilitation, but then to look at specifically what women in cross-border trade are facing. I think we are probably, I would say, the first organization that is completely dedicated to advocating for issues of women in informal cross-border trade in Southern Africa. So the unique issues that affect women include issues of gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and human rights violations. And I think I will expand on that later on in the podcast. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary, and well done with the work that you're doing at AFECTASA. I'm sure our audience will agree with me that we have the right person sitting here to really discuss issues affecting women in cross-border trade in Africa. So let's move on to the next question. So according to the World Bank, women play a key role in trade in Africa and will be essential to Africa's success in exploiting its trade potential. Women make a major contribution to trade in most African countries through their involvement in the production of tradable goods as cross-border traders and as managers and owners of firms involved in trade. Mary, can you elaborate on the role of women in cross-border trade in Africa, the scale and impact of their contributions, and the key challenges they face in cross-border trade?
Thank you. I think, first of all, what I would want to say is that we cannot talk about intra-Africa trade without talking about women or without the involvement of women, because over 80% of informal cross-border traders in Africa are women. And in Southern Africa, almost over 70%. And looking at the average value of informal cross-border trade in Southern Africa alone, it is estimated at 17.6 billion US dollars per annum. And that is a very, very significant figure. If you look at women who are in informal cross-border trade, they are very, very key in addressing vital issues of livelihoods, such as food and income security. But you find that most often they are neglected by the mainstream trade policies and institutions. So this neglect actually undermines their profitability and visibility. Informal cross-border trade is a major characteristic of the African economic and social landscape. And it represents up to 40% of regional trade. Going to the challenges, there are various challenges that women in informal cross-border trade face. I'll just highlight the key challenges. First of all, we have issues of non-tariff barriers. So you find that women are facing a lot of non-tariff barriers as they are doing their cross-border trade. You find that they have to fill complex and lengthy documents, especially if they are to import or export. You find that they face limited information on trade agreements, including even what we call the simplified trade regime. And this results in low uptake of trade preferences. There's the issue of lack of finance and credit. You find that due to their informality, the formal financial systems, for example, commercial banks or other formal financial systems, are not able to lend to these women because they feel like they are high-risk clients. You find that they also don't have any social protection, so they don't have any social security, insurance, or pension. There is a low uptake of digital trade due to limited access to various ICT. This includes the access to smartphones, which women can use for digital trade. And as I mentioned earlier, we see as a major challenge the issue of human rights violations, sexual harassment, and gender-based violence. And another key challenge that I will highlight is the issue of poor and inadequate infrastructure. This is at the various border crossings that we have within Africa. You find that the border crossings may not have the adequate sanitation facilities that are ideal for women who are, as I mentioned already, are the majority of cross-border traders. So you find that women have got their own unique needs. Some cross-border traders, they would travel with small children, but when you go through the borders, you find that the infrastructure is not suitable for women and including those that have small children. So briefly, those are the major challenges that women in cross-border trade face. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Mary. So we are going to delve further into the issue of barriers that women face. So can you outline the impact of regulations and policies on women engaged in cross-border trade? What specific regulatory barriers do they encounter? And are there any policies in place that are designed to address these challenges?
Thank you. So I'll start by highlighting the challenges, the regulatory barriers. As I mentioned already, there are issues of strict licensing and permit requirements. So for those women that are doing import and export, they are required to fill forms so that they can get permits, licenses, and certification. So this is quite costly for women and also time consuming. And for women that have limited financial resources or information about where to obtain these permits and licenses, it can be a real barrier. We also look at the issue of customs procedures. And normally, these are very, very complex and can be lengthy and complicated. And for women who lack support in form of legal or custom brokers or trade information desk officers, they find this very, very challenging. I know that in a few borders within Africa, we have what are called trade information desk officers. These are people that assist women traders in terms of filling these complex forms and customs procedures, but they are not available in all the borders. So in some of the borders, women really face challenges in terms of fulfilling these complex customs procedures. There's the issue of high compliance costs and fees. As we know, women who are doing informal cross-border trade, they have very, very small profit margins and very low capital. So for issues that require payment, you find that a lot of women are not able to meet these various costs and fees. We look also at issues of restrictions. We do experience issues whereby countries may impose restrictive import or export bans and quotas. So you find that some products would be banned by certain countries, and these are the products that probably women would trade in most. So as a result of this, you find that women would be resorting to lower value goods, trading in low value goods, especially like agricultural products, due to restrictive import and export procedures, and sometimes even bans by certain countries. We see also a lack of gender-sensitive trade facilitation policies. So we find that policies that exist within African countries, not all, but several African countries, you find that the measures are designed without considering the unique and specific needs and challenges of women. For example, we look at the issue of maybe having more flexible times for border processing or having simplified procedures that take less time so that women are able to cross the border at at lesser time than it normally takes, so that the women that are conducting trade are able to cross quickly so that they can be able to go and sell their goods and also go and take care of their family needs. We also see the issue of restrictive SPS measures. These are sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which most of the times are very, very costly to comply with and are very, very difficult for small-scale traders, especially women, who often deal with the food products and other perishables. So most of the times you find that they may struggle to meet these SPS standards. And another barrier is the issue of inadequate information on regulatory requirements, which lead to delays or penalties. We also see issues of time-consuming inspection and verification processes at the border. And finally, we also see another barrier as lack of formal recognition and support for informal traders, which excludes them from accessing formal support. So here we're talking about the informal cross-border traders. So they are normally excluded from any formal support, whether it's by government or non-governmental organizations. So they don't have access to protection, they don't have access to dispute resolution mechanisms. So they are really left vulnerable to exploitation, and this limits their ability to grow their businesses. Now I'll look at some of the measures that are available across Africa, some regulatory and policy measures that are available. First of all is the STR, that's the Simplified Trade Regime. COMESA has a very, very vibrant simplified trade regime. This aims to reduce paperwork and regulatory costs for small-scale traders. So it allows traders with goods valued below a certain threshold to benefit from simplified customs procedures and reduced tariffs. For the current one, I believe it's between $2,000 and $3,000. So if you are trading goods below that threshold, traders become exempt from certain duties. And as I mentioned already, that women have got limited access to finance and capital. So this simplified trade regime is really a policy that benefits them a lot. Or even though the list of goods under various STR between various countries is very, very limited, but for the goods that women are able to trade, they do benefit from the trade preferences. Another policy, we look at the East African community, which has developed gender-sensitive border policies and customs procedures. For example, they have conducted gender-sensitive training for border officials and trade information desk officers. Looking at another region in ECOWAS, they have developed microfinance and credit access policies. For example, the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development has policies to encourage banks to offer microloans to women traders. We do have several regional trade agreements that are supporting informal trade. For example, we have the SADC trade protocol, the East African Community, we have COMESA and other regional trade agreements. Now we even have the tripartite free trade area, which is a block comprising SADC, EAC, and COMESA. And of course, we also have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is the Continental Trade Agreement. And finally, we have countries like Rwanda and Uganda that have policies aimed at protecting women against harassment and exploitation by border officials. I think these are some of the measures that we have seen on the continent that are assisting in terms of creating an enabling environment for women traders on the continent. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you for highlighting the challenges that women in informal cross-border trade face, and also the various measures that are in place by different countries, the regional economic communities, and um, and other organizations. So we will still continue with our discussion on barriers. Moving on, the World Bank notes that Africa's trade potential is undermined by constraints that women face. The contribution of women to trade is much less than it could be because of various specific non-tariff barriers that impinge particularly heavily on the trade activities of women and women-owned enterprises. One of the specific objectives of the AfCFTA, that's the African Continental Free Trade Area, is to support and enhance the effective participation of women and youth in trade, in intra-African trade. So that's the objectives of the AfCFTA Women and Youth in Trade Protocol. So I would like to ask you, Mary, do you believe that the AfCFTA Women and Youth in Trade Protocol is well designed to help women overcome these barriers, these cross-border trade barriers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the AfCFTA protocol on women and youth in trade represents a comprehensive effort to integrate women and youth in the AfCFTA. If you look at the preamble, it specifically mentions informal cross-border traders. But unfortunately, that's the only place where they are mentioned. But looking at various sections of the protocol, which I'll just quickly highlight, we see really quite a comprehensive effort in terms of, supporting and encouraging state parties to support women in cross-border trade to participate in Africa trade. So if you look at the Article 6 of the protocol, it talks about elimination of non-tariff barriers. I think I mentioned the several barriers earlier. So what the protocol says is that it encourages state parties to ensure and promote participation of women and youth in trade associations, in national monitoring committees, to ensure active role in the identification, resolution, monitoring, and elimination of non-tariff barriers. So you might wish to know that the AfCFTA has got a mechanism for reporting non-tariff barriers, and several regional economic communities have got the same. For example, COMESA has got also a reporting mechanism. I think this is a very, very progressive move by the AfCFTA, because I think one of the major hurdles that are faced by women in informal cross-border trade are these non-tariff barriers. So to have a system whereby these barriers can be reported, I think it is a very, very progressive move. If you look at Article 7 of the protocol, it talks about inclusive socio-economic development. So this looks at promoting empowerment, eliminating discriminatory practices, and enhancing productive capacity of women and youth in trade. So it further calls for strengthening and support of associations of women and youth in trade. I think this is also very, very important, because if you look at the issues that we have discussed already, the barriers especially, it is important for women traders to have somewhere where they can report. And the associations exist to assist the women and also provide them with information on where they can report the non-tariff barriers that they meet. So the strengthening and support of associations is also a very, very key aspect in the protocol. In Article 10, it talks about issues of access to finance. And this is an issue that I think I raised already. So the protocol says implementation of measures to facilitate access to affordable financial instruments, services, and guarantees for women and youth in trade. I think I mentioned already that the issue of lack of access is particularly a huge challenge amongst women in informal cross-border trade, because these are women that are informal. So most of the time you find that they don't even have a bank account, they don't have registered businesses, they don't have collateral that they can use to access the financial services. So here, the issue of access to finance, it is key in ensuring that women, including those in informal cross-border trade, are able to access. Here it talks about affordable financial instruments, which will be key to ensuring that they are able to have adequate capital for their cross-border trade business. In Article 11, it talks about development of productive and export capacity. Enhancing technical capacity, fostering integration in regional and continental value chains, and participation in trade fairs for increase in product visibility. This is also one of the very key sections in the protocol, because if we're talking about cross-border trade, then we're talking about import and export. So for women in cross-border trade, they need to have the knowledge of export. What are the requirements, the issues of standards, issues of rules of origin, issues of import-export licenses. All this information is key for women to be able to participate in regional and continental value chains. And here they talk about participation in trade fairs. And I know that the AFCFTA organizes intra-Africa trade fairs. And these are very key spaces and forums for women in informal cross-border trade to be able to showcase their products and also to enhance their product visibility. Article 12 looks at access to trade information, which is also a very important aspect. Issues to do with market intelligence and other relevant trade information for women and youth in trade. And this information has to be presented to women in simple and easily understandable format. You may wish to know that a lot of women that are in informal cross-border trade may have lower levels of literacy than the ordinary women, maybe the SMEs. So the information that is presented to women has to be really simplified and easily understandable for their use. We have Article 15, that is talking about participation in formal trade activities. So this is looking at promoting the participation of women and youth in formal cross-border trade. Simplification of documentation, procedures and processes for small-scale cross-border trade, and also mechanisms to assist traders to comply with simplified requirements, collection of gender disaggregated data. Article 16 of the protocol looks at protection against harassment and related practices, and I think this is an area that I also mentioned earlier. So the protocol provides for establishment, strengthening of grievance redress mechanisms on issues of harassment and related practices that affect women and youth in trade. It also talks about implementation and monitoring mechanisms to prevent, discourage, address, and eliminate all forms of harassment and related practices that compromise the security and safety of women and youth in trade. And finally, on the protocol on women and youth in trade, Article 17 is talking about digital trade. So here it talks about ensuring that digital frameworks support women and youth in trade, facilitating access to digital trade platforms and solutions. So we know that for women to be engaged in intra-Africa trade, digital trade is very, very key and very, very important. And it is good that it has been placed as one of the sections in the protocol. Yes, so I think these sections that I've highlighted, the articles, are really a testament that the protocol on women and youth in trade has been designed to assist women and youth who are engaged in cross-border trade in Africa. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Mary, for taking us through the AFCFT Women and Youth in Trade Protocol. That was an extensive review. And I think one key point that you had highlighted is you mentioned the fact that there is just one part that refers to women in informal cross-border trade, so that needs to be improved upon. I believe during the course of the review that that should be addressed. But overall summary, the AFCFT Women and Youth in Trade is designed to address issues that women and youth encounter across the borders during with their trade. Okay, moving on to the next question. The African Bank's 2020 trade report highlights that women represent approximately 70% of informal cross-border traders in the Southern African Development Community, that's SADC, and nearly 60% in West and Central Africa. Article 19.1 of the AFCFTA Women and Youth in Trade Protocol urges state parties to take measures promoting the formalization of women and youth in cross-border trade. What specific measures would you recommend to state parties to help integrate women in informal trade into the formal economy, including improving their access to trade information? I know you've discussed some of this in the course of earlier on, but to specifically highlight it now for state parties to take notes. So what sort of measures should they be looking at to integrate women in informal trade into the formal trading? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can start with saying that first of all, formalization is not a realistic and affordable option for everyone. But for those that would be willing to formalize, we should encourage state parties to, first of all, simplify regulatory processes, such as business registration and licensing procedures. Because one of the issues that women complain about is the issue of, in some countries, business registration process is quite complex and expensive. And you might find that probably the registration center is not decentralized. You have to travel probably to the capital city or a major city in order to register your business. So most women find that this could be, kind of a barrier. So I would urge state parties to look at simplifying these processes. Secondly, looking at improving access to financial services. For example, issues of microfinance, grants, and low interest loans. Also looking at easing the issue of digital banking and mobile money services. Now, on the issue of mobile money services, also, I think there's a need to look at a cross-border transactions through mobile money, because women in informal cross-border trade, most of them, they don't use the formal banking systems. Most of the times they're using the mobile money services, which in some cases you find that you can't use the mobile money services from one country to the other, even though it may have probably the same platform. For example, Airtel. You may have Airtel in one country and have Airtel in another country, but you may find that you may not be able to use Airtel for mobile money services in different countries. They could also look at training women in financial and digital literacy, as well as compliance and tax obligations. I think these are the areas where issue of formality, becomes a challenge for a lot of women in informal cross-border trade. First of all, because they don't have that financial knowledge, and they don't have a lot of knowledge in a digital trade. And then when it comes to tax issues, which most of the times are complex, you find that they are not willing, first of all, to register their businesses, as I said, and also to register as a tax compliant businesses, because of the complexities that I've mentioned already. State parties should also look at the issue of access to social protection and security. For example, you find that a lot of women in informal cross-border trade, they don't have access to health care. They don't have health insurance, they don't have pension, and they don't have any unemployment benefits. Looking at strengthening legal rights and protections, for example, looking at laws that protect against discrimination and harassment for women in informal cross-border trade. And finally, looking at incentives for those women that want to formalize their businesses. So these incentives could be things like provision of space, workspace, offering lower interest rates, and provision of probably larger loans for businesses that have formalized. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think it is important for state parties to put measures in place that will, based on what you have shared, because women in informal cross-border trades, they contribute significantly to intra-African trade. Then it is important to start putting measures in place that will be able to help them integrate into the formal trading process. You've mentioned simplified business registration processes. That's one thing that state parties need to also look into. I will just ask you, I know you had mentioned earlier that some countries that put measures in place to address harassment across border and all of that. Can you just specifically just diving deep into that, what sort of mechanisms can state parties under the EFCFA implement to prevent, address, and eliminate harassment and other practices that compromise the security and safety of women in trade? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, which has really come at a very, very, timely time. You might be aware that from 25th November to 10th December each and every year, the world commemorates 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So women in informal cross-border trade, they do face issue of gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and other forms of human rights violations. And these have been very well documented over many, many years. And yet, we see that the practice is very much alive and vibrant. And this has actually been confirmed by Amnesty International through a report on human rights violations against women in cross-border trade in Southern Africa. This report was released earlier this year, specifically in March during the International Women's Day. So it really highlighted the issues of sexual harassment, the issues of gender-based violence, the issues of human rights violations that women in informal cross-border trade face on a regular basis. So looking at the gravity of this issue, we would think that state parties should first of all put in place policies that protect women in informal cross-border trade. And these policies should eliminate all gender-based violence, including harassment that is in the trading context, that is in the context of cross-border trade. As they are crossing the borders, that's where most of the times they meet this harassment, and also at some police roadblocks. We should look at training of customs officers, border officials, and police that man these roadblocks where women pass through as they're doing their trade. So this training should enable these officers to recognize, prevent, and respond to gender-based violence and harassment cases. Also looking at establishment of legal aid services to assist women in reporting cases and filing complaints. You find that even though these issues are rampant and probably reported in reports, but we find that most of the times women are actually afraid to report the issues because they fear probably the backlash that they'll face from the customs officials or the border officials, because they, being cross-border traders, they frequent the borders, they frequent the roadblocks. So most of the times they are actually afraid to report to any authority. We should look at creation of safe spaces at borders through gender-sensitive infrastructure. Here we're talking at looking at issues of secure waiting areas and shelters at border posts. So since women that are crossing borders, they spend a lot of time from one country to the other, and when they reach the borders, sometimes there are delays, sometimes they have to spend a night layover at the border. But when you visit a lot of these borders, you see that they don't have adequate security. They don't have adequate waiting shelters. They don't have gender-sensitive infrastructure. Even issues of the sanitary facilities that are there, you might find that they are not even, adequate, taking into account the specific needs of women that are crossing these borders. Also, we'd look at establishing reporting and support systems. This could be something like a hotline or helpline for reporting harassment and gender-based violence incidents. So this could be through accessible phone or messaging service, which can be able to work even in remote areas, and also to encourage anonymous reporting of these issues, maybe through whether a mobile app or suggestion boxes at the borders, and other discrete methods that will encourage women to report and not fear any backlash from officials. Looking at building women's networks and associations that can offer peer support, and also amplify their voices and advocate for safer trading conditions for women. We also look at encouraging partnerships between governments, non-governmental organizations, local authorities, and women's associations, just to develop and implement GBV and harassment prevention initiatives. As I mentioned already, you're looking at maybe having that reporting mechanism, which currently is not there. We have the mechanism for reporting non-tariff barriers, but we don't have a specific mechanism for reporting issues of harassment and gender-based violence. And finally, looking to engage men as allies in preventing gender-based violence and harassment. So here we could be looking at programs that encourage men to actively support and advocate for safe trading environments for women, which can be it can be actually a very powerful tool in shifting the norms, whereby some communities feel it is normal for women to be harassed. It is normal for women to face all sorts of kind of violence. But we are looking at, if we engage the men, they can be, advocates to advocate for women, and also maybe talk to their fellow men about how they can prevent or eliminate issues of gender-based violence and sexual harassment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. I like the fact that you had mentioned that getting men to be gender advocates who can speak to fellow men about this issue. I'll just move on quick to the next one. It's the African Bank 2020 Trade Report, which I mentioned earlier, highlights that informal cross-border traders, especially women, often have minimal savings and limited access to formal banking due to being seen as high-risk borrowers, lacking collateral, financial histories, and reliable identification. Consequently, they have to rely on limited personal funds, small loans from friends and family, or expensive informal money lenders. And Article 11 of the AFCFTA Women and Youth in Trade Protocol necessitates state parties to facilitate access to affordable financial instruments and services tailored to women and youth in trade in collaboration with financial providers. I know you've mentioned, you've talked about the issue of finances, but we are going to dig deep now. So, as a gender and trade expert, can you recommend specific measures that state parties should implement to improve financial access for these informal women traders? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mobola. Yes. As I mentioned, that access to finance for women in informal cross-border trade is quite a huge challenge, because the formal financial sector feels that these are high-risk borrowers. One, because of their informality, and two, because of their mobility. So we would urge state parties to look at, firstly, offering microfinance to these groups of women. Also looking at issues of mobile-based microcredit and group loans. And I think you already mentioned the issue of collateral, that most of these women may not have any or adequate assets that they can declare as collateral against any commercial loan. So group loans can be something that can assist women in informal cross-border trade. We also look at the issue of digital wallets and cross-border payment solutions. I think this is something that I mentioned already. I know that there has been some movement in this area. We have something that is being called the Pan-African Payment System. And our hope is that this is something that women in informal cross-border trade can be able to utilize at their level. I mentioned already issues of financial literacy, but also business training. Apart from the training in export readiness or standards or rules of origin, looking at the actual business training itself, because if these women have got adequate knowledge about how to run businesses properly, they would be able to now try and formalize their businesses, I think, as we mentioned earlier. And once a business is formalized, then they ordinarily don't meet much hurdles as the informal businesses and those that are not registered. Here we'll be also looking at government-backed loan guarantees or any other guaranteed loans. It could be government, it could be any financial institution. Also encourage women to form savings groups from which they can borrow money for business. Also looking at encouraging e-commerce platforms for cross-border traders and trade financing through digital platforms. I think we already mentioned the issue of digital trade. That is very, very key for women to participate in intra-Africa trade. So if state parties can facilitate the participation of a lot more women in formal cross-border trade in e-commerce platforms, that would be very, very useful. And then finally, looking at incentives, I think I mentioned those already for formalization. So for those women that are in formal cross-border trade that want to formalize, I think state parties should be able to put in place various incentives such as lower interest rates or access to larger loans for those that would like to formalize their businesses. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary. And finally, the last question is, do you have any additional recommendations for policymakers to further support women in cross-border trade?
Yes, what I would say firstly is the issue of the simplified trade regime. I think it is mentioned in the protocol on women and youth in trade, but I feel like it was just mentioned in passing. So I think there's a need to really look at, is it possible to have a continental simplified trade regime like we have in some of the regional economic communities? And for example, the COMESA simplified trade regime is one of the most vibrant ones on the continent. So probably we could look at also looking at probably establishing a continental simplified trade regime, because this is really a very powerful tool, especially for women who are doing cross-border trade, because they are able to trade those that are trading with really low-value goods. So that would encourage a lot of women to participate in intra-Africa trade. And finally, I think I'd also want to look at the issue of strengthening the capacities of associations of women in cross-border trade, both at national, regional, and continental levels. These associations are very, very key in building the export readiness capacity of women traders. And they are also very, very key in ensuring that the women have access to finance, they get linked to all sorts of programs, they get linked to regional value chains, and also support women to participate in digital trade. So these are the two issues really that I wanted to conclude with. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mary, for joining me this afternoon. Really, really learned so much from you. You have shared so much insights for us in respect of challenges that women face in formal cross-border trade, even formal cross-border trade, and measures that policymakers should start putting in place. And I also like the fact that you mentioned that during your last recommendation that on the AFCFTA Women and Youth in Trade Protocol, the simplified trade regime, you mentioned in passing, but it should be really looked into to ensure that it is applicable. And you talked about having a continental simplified trade regime, and also that the women associations should be strengthened, because this is usually like the ecosystem support system for women. Thank you so much, Mary, for joining me once again. It's really a pleasure having you on the Trading Without Borders podcast. And we hope that when we call on you some other time, or we come to your association, you'll be willing to come on board to share with the audience, with Africa, with policymakers all across the board. Thank you so much. And I want to wish you a very good afternoon, and you to also enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me and Affectata on this podcast. And yes, we would be willing to share with you any other issues that may come up in the future. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much.